This is worse than we thought. The asphalt is cracking further and those houses are actively sinking. We need to move fast if we want to mitigate the disaster.
They called it undeveloped. That's the word the HOA used in their glossy newsletters, the undeveloped wetland, behind the north cul-de-sac. But to me, that land was the breathing lung of the neighborhood. That's where the frogs croaked like a choir at dusk, where the soil smelled like memory after every rainfall. I moved into Fox Hollow Ridge 13 years ago. After retiring from the Army Corps of Engineers, I spent my life analyzing soil integrity, structural faults, and floodplains. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted peace, a place to breathe, to let the past settle in my bones. But the peace didn't last. It started simple, orange survey markers staked along the soft perimeter. Then came the HOA meeting, the board president, Everett Langston, presenting his grand vision, 23 luxury villas circling a reclaimed lakeside vista. With paddle boats and private docks, I raised my hand. You know that land is classified as a category 2 wetland, right? Everett gave me that condescending smile, the one he always gave when someone dared challenge his pet projects. We've consulted developers, he said, waving me off. They say it's reclaimable. I knew better. I dug through my old Army Corps documentation, maps, soil integrity tests, hydrology forecasts from the 1980s. That entire floodplain was fed by a subsurface aquifer. It was a giant sponge, holding the seasonal rainwater. Drain that land, and the groundwater destabilizes. Remove the marsh grasses, and the soil collapses under its own weight. I wrote a formal letter to the HOA, attaching every document: foundational sinkage, long-term erosion, irreversible wildlife displacement. I emailed every board member I could find. They never responded. Instead, Everett announced a community improvement initiative, passed the vote, and started work. Most residents saw dollar signs, not fault lines. You're gambling with the structural integrity of this entire area. I objected. That land isn't stable. Everett gave me that same sickening smile. Mr. Halbrook, your concerns have been noted. But they hadn't. They were being ignored. Just like the land they were about to desecrate. I walked the boundary again, tracing the orange flags. I knelt and pushed my hand into the ground. It sank to the knuckle, wet, silty, black. The kind of soil that swallowed everything it didn't want. I remembered my old commanding officer's phrase, "If it smells too sweet, it's rotting beneath." A few days later, I received the first fine for unauthorized signage. My small wooden stake near the trail. That read protected wetland. Do not disturb. They called it visual pollution. I knew then this wasn't just ignorance. It was war. They were trying to erase me. The first sign of the fight was the smell: acid, metallic, pulled from the deep. They brought in industrial pumps just after dawn one Tuesday, no notice. The pumps roared to life, sucking the marsh water out through long black hoses that curled like snakes. I stood on my porch, my hands shaking, taking photos, timestamps, license plates. I sent the whole file, the old Army maps, the photos, the warnings to the county's Environmental Planning Division. Then I took the biggest step. I found an old Army Corps buddy, Carlos Eddings, who worked in state planning. He was alarmed. He looped in a hydrologist, Mara Jensen, a graduate student interning with the state EPA. Mara quickly confirmed my deepest fears. The soil's already breaking cohesion. If they keep driving vehicles over it, they're compacting failure into every inch. While the state wheels turned slowly, the HOA accelerated. Everett must have known he had a window. Crews began laying rebar and gravel across the newly exposed mud flats. I drove my old auger into the ground late one night, pulled a core sample, and mailed it to Mara. 2 days later, her voice was breathless. "Mr. Halbrook, the sample's alarming. Collapse is compromised even before any foundation pours begin." But still, the contractors kept working. I filmed, I documented. The HOA hit back with a fine for harassing contractors and emotional intimidation. They tried to wear me down with paper bullets. Then, a strange thing happened. A woman named Linda knocked on my door. She lived 2 blocks over. "They sent me a letter threatening to sue over a swing set," she said. "They target older residents. Everett is corrupt. Soon, more neighbors." A retired teacher fined for wind chimes. A young couple whose dog was deemed excessively vocal. began reaching out quietly. I had just been the first one to scream. The silent resistance began to coalesce. But the machines dug too deep. An auger struck a pressurized aquifer layer. A geyser of black water surged 10 feet in the air. The foreman called for a halt. The marsh had just begun to exhale. I was stunned, but the HOA wasn't done. They weaponized the neighborhood itself. They printed slick, professional flyers in bold red font, jamming them into every mailbox. Misinformation from Mr. Halbrook threatens our community progress. He has no credentials in environmental policy. Do not engage with attempts to disrupt construction. They framed me as the saboteur. They were trying to make me radioactive. The emotional weight was crushing. But the land kept speaking. Water began rising in the trenches again, despite non-stop pumping. Cracks formed in the gravel drives. The more they tried to build, the more the earth pushed back. Mara confirmed it. The entire subsurface is essentially a sponge with failing integrity. I knew the final piece was buried. I spent a night reviewing municipal code, and just before dawn, I found it, an environmental impact assessment from 7 years ago, declaring the exact same parcel unsuitable for large-scale residential development. It was signed, sealed, and buried until I found it. The email went out just after sunrise, urgent. Falsified public works documentation. I CC'd the State Department of Environmental Protection and the EPA. I expected silence, but 3 hours later, I got a reply. We are initiating an internal review immediately. A field team will be dispatched within the next 72 hours. The fuse was lit. I didn't include the HOA in that final email. They had made it clear they weren't interested in facts. But 3 hours later, my old commanding officer from Kandahar, Tom Pritchard, now a consultant for the EPA, called me. I saw your name cross my desk, Halbrook, he said, still raising hell with bad dirt. I pulled the plans. They either falsified the compliance forms or bribed someone. Tom flew down the next day. We spent hours combing the data, then walked the perimeter. At Lot 6, where the ground had ruptured, Tom tapped his boot. A hollow thud. Void pocket, he said. Collapse is coming. We filed the official complaint under both state and federal statutes, and we sent copies to the local press. Once this hits the press, Tom warned, they'll circle the wagons. You ready for that? I've been ready since the first frog stopped singing, I replied. The news report hit that night. Wetlands in peril. Veteran homeowner says HOA ignored warning signs. Suddenly, I wasn't a pariah. I was the canary in the coal mine, but the HOA was scrambling. They were so busy hiding their internal communications that they didn't realize. The earth was working on its own timetable. The sky broke open on a Tuesday. It wasn't the first storm, but it was the one that mattered. I watched from my porch as the drainage trenches idle. Since the state's suspension order filled in under an hour, water rushed over the gravel lots. The land remembered what it was, and it was reclaiming itself. At 11:17 p.m., my power died. I grabbed my flashlight and watched the first structure, Lot 3's illegal utility shed, tip and slide into the muck. The earth underneath gave way with a sound like tearing cloth. Quiet, but final. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, but the damage was just beginning. Lot 4 was gone. What remained was a jagged hole nearly 20 feet across and 10 feet deep, filled with brown water. Two massive concrete blocks were fully submerged. The cement mixture was visible only by its drum, protruding like the hull of a sunken ship. Langston's own house, the model villa on Lot 6, was leaning hard to the left, its side porch torn away from the foundation. I stood across from the devastation, arms folded, as a news reporter approached. Mr. Halbrook, is this what you warned about? No, I said. This is what they refused to hear. The environmental audit was expedited. The EPA sent 2 more inspectors. FEMA even sent an inquiry. The most damning discovery: the HOA clubhouse was locked and sealed with crime scene tape. Investigators found shredded documents in the dumpster, permits, invoices, and uncashed checks written from the HOA General Fund to a shell company owned by Langston's cousin. Everett Langston was indicted along with 2 former board members for fraudulent permitting, environmental negligence, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Justice was coming with paperwork, hearings, and slow accountability. Langston was eventually sentenced to 6 years in state prison. But the true change wasn't the prison sentence, it was the community council we formed. No more board or acronyms, just a voluntary, resident-led group. They asked me to chair the advisory committee. I agreed on one condition: we never call it a board. Our first act was to vote in favor of a wetland restoration plan. We secured EPA grants to replant native grasses and decommission all artificial drainage trenches. The destroyed lots were fenced off. We called it the Sink, a public learning space. About environmental restoration, the marsh healed slowly. The cattails rose again, their green shoots piercing the mud like tiny flags of resistance. I stood one late autumn afternoon, watching a crane white, elegant, standing knee-deep in the water where the old drainage pump once stood. I realized I hadn't stopped the villas from sinking. I had simply reminded people the ground was never solid. This wasn't a story about collapse. It was a story about roots, about remembering where we stand and what happens when we dig too deep for the wrong reasons. Now, here's the thought I want you to wrestle with. Everett Langston and the HOA were clearly corrupt, but they offered a dream, a lakeside villa and elevated property values. James Halbrook offered reality, mud, and preservation. Did the HOA have a right to pursue economic growth, even if it risked a slow collapse? Or did the long-term integrity of the land always outweigh profit? Tell me in the comments below.